Continuing where I left off, Chapter 15. Between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Prince Andrei, who had persisted in his request to Kutuzov, arrived at Grunt and reported himself to Bagration. Bonaparte's adjutant had not yet reached Murat, and the battle had not begun. In Bagration's detachment, nothing was known of the general course of events. They talked of peace, but did not believe in its possibility. They talked of combat, but did not believe in the imminence of an engagement. Knowing Bukovsky to be a favored and trusted adjutant, Bagration received him with marked respect and consideration, explaining to him that there would probably be an engagement that day or the next, and offering him the choice of remaining with him during the battle or joining the rear guard to supervise the order to retreat, which is also very important. There will probably be no action today, however, said Bagration, as if to reassure Prince Andrei. If this is one of those ordinary little staff dandies sent to earn a cross, he can just as well get his reward in the rear guard. But if he wishes to stay with me, let him. He'll be of use if he's a brave officer, thought Bagration. Without replying, Prince Andrei asked permission to go over the position and acquaint himself with the disposition of the troops, so that in case he were sent with an order he would know where to go. The officer of the day, a handsome, foppishly dressed man with a diamond ring on his forefinger, who spoke French readily but very badly, was summoned to conduct Prince Andrei. On all sides they saw rain-soaked officers with dejected faces, who appeared to be looking for something, and soldiers dragging doors, benches, and facing from the village. "See there! We can't stop these people," said the staff officer, indicating the soldiers. "The officers have let them get out of hand. And look there," he said, pointing to a canteen that had been set up in a tent. "There they gathered, and there they sit. This morning I drove them all out, and now look, it's full again. I must go, Prince, and scare them off. I won't be a moment." "Yes, let us go in, and I'll get myself some cheese and a roll," said Prince Andrei, who had not yet had time to eat anything. "Why didn't you mention it, Prince? I would have offered you something." They dismounted and went into the tent. Several officers, with flushed and weary faces, were sitting at tables, eating and drinking. "Now what does this mean, gentlemen?" said the staff officer, in a reproachful tone of a man who has repeated the same thing more than once. "You know it won't do for you to absent yourselves like this." The prince gave orders that no one was to leave his post. "Now you, Captain," he turned to a thin, dirty little artillery officer who, without his boots, he had given them to the canteen keeper to dry, stood up in his stocking feet when they entered, smiling not altogether naturally. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Captain Tushin," the staff officer continued. "One would think that as an artillery officer you would set an example, and here you are without your boots. They'll sound the alarm, and you'll be in a nice position without boots." The staff officer smiled. "Kindly return to your post, gentlemen, and all of you, he added in an overbearing tone. Prince Andrei could not help smiling as he glanced at Captain Tushin. Silently grinning, Tushin shifted from one stocking foot to the other, and looked inquiringly from Prince Andrei to the staff officer with his large, kind, intelligent eyes. "The soldiers say you're sprier without your boots," said Captain Tushin with a timid smile, evidently hoping to extricate himself from his awkward position by taking a jocular tone. But no sooner were the words out than he felt that his joke had misfired. He was embarrassed. "Kindly return to your post," said the staff officer, trying to maintain his gravity. Prince Andrei again glanced at the little figure of the artillery officer. There was something peculiar about it, something absolutely unmilitary and rather droll, but exceedingly attractive. The staff officer and Prince Andrei mounted their horses and rode on. Having ridden beyond the village, continually meeting and overtaking soldiers and officers of various units, they saw on their left the red, freshly dug clay of fortifications that were being erected. Several battalions of soldiers in shirt sleeves, despite the cold wind, were digging like a swarm of white ants in these earthworks. Spadefuls of red clay were being thrown up from behind the bulwark by unseen hands. Prince Andrei and the officer went up to the entrenchment, examined it, and rode on. Just behind it, they came upon some dozens of soldiers running from the fortification and continually being replaced by others. They had to hold their noses and put their horses to a trot to escape the nauseous atmosphere. "There you have the charms of camp life, Prince," said the staff officer in French. They rode up the opposite hill. From the height the French could be seen. Prince Andrei stopped and began to examine the position. "You see, that's where our battery stands," said the staff officer, indicating the highest point. "It's in command of that queer fellow who was sitting there without his boots. From there you can see everything." "Let us go there, Prince." "Thank you very much. I will go alone," said Prince Andrei, anxious to be rid of the other staff officer. "Please don't trouble yourself further." The staff officer remained behind, and Prince Andrei rode on alone. The farther forward and nearer to the enemy he went, the more orderly and cheerful were the troops. The greatest disorder and depression had been in the baggage train he had passed that morning on the road to Nîmes, which was 10 versts from the French. At Grunt, too, a certain anxiety and fear could be detected. But the nearer Prince Andrei came to the French lines, the more confident our troops looked. The soldiers in their great coats were lined up, and the sergeant major and the company officers were counting them off, giving the last man in each section a poke in the ribs and telling him to hold up his hand. Soldiers scattered over the whole terrain were dragging logs and brushwood and building shelters, laughing and talking good-humoredly. Around the campfires, men in various states of undress were dyeing their shirts and leg wrappers, mending boots and greatcoats, or crowding around the cauldrons and gruel pots. And one company dinner was ready, and the soldiers gazed hungrily at the steaming cauldrons, waiting till the sample had been tasted, which the quartermaster sergeant was taking in a wooden bowl to an officer sitting on a log before his shelter. In another company, a lucky one, for not all the companies had vodka, the soldiers crowded around a broad-shouldered, pock-marked sergeant major, who was tilting a keg and filling their canteen lids as they held them out to him in turn. The soldiers raised them to their lips with reverent expressions, threw back their heads, and rolled the vodka around in their mouths, then wiped their mouths on the sleeves of the greatcoats and walked off looking more cheerful. All their faces were as serene as if this were taking place in their native land in peacetime quarters, and not within sight of the enemy, and before an engagement in which at least half of them would doubtless be left on the field. After riding past a Chasseur regiment and into the lines of the Kiev Grenadiers, stalwart fellows all engaged in similar peaceful pursuits, not far from the regimental commander's shelter, which stood higher than the others, Prince Andrei came upon a platoon of grenadiers before whom lay a man who had been stripped. 2 soldiers held him while 2 others brandished switches, their blows falling at regular intervals on his bare back. The man screamed inhumanly. A stout major was walking up and down in front of the line, and in ignoring the screams kept saying, "It's a disgrace for a soldier to steal. A soldier must be honest, upright, and brave. If he steals from a comrade, he is without honor, a swine. Go on, keep it up." And the hissing of the switches and the desperate unnatural shrieks continued. "Go on, keep it up," repeated the major. A young officer, with a pain-bewildered expression, walked away from the flogging and looked up inquiringly at the adjutant riding by. Prince Andrei, having reached the front, rode along the extended line. Our battle line and that of the enemy were far apart at the right and left flanks, but in the middle, wherein that morning the truce emissaries had passed, they were so close that the soldiers could see one another's faces and talk together. Besides the soldiers in the line, there were at that point many curious onlookers who had gathered on both sides and laughingly stared at their strange foreign enemies. Since early morning, despite the injunction against approaching the battle line, the officers had been unable to keep back these people. The soldiers posted there, like showmen exhibiting some sort of prodigy, no longer watched the French, but turned their attention to the onlookers and grew bored waiting to be relieved. Prince Andrei stopped and scrutinized the French. "Look there, look!" one soldier was saying to another, pointing to a Russian musketeer who had gone up to the line with his officer and was excitedly rapidly talking with a French grenadier. Listen to him jabbering him. Not bad. Now then, Sindarov, you. Wait. Listen to him. Pretty good, said Sidorov, who was considered an expert at speaking French. The soldier to whom the two laughing men were referring to was Dolokhov. Prince Andrei recognized him and stopped to listen to what he was saying. Dolokhov and his captain had come from the left flank where the company was stationed. Go on, the captain incited him, bending forward and trying not to miss a single word, though the conversation was quite incomprehensible to him. Again, please, what's he saying? Dolokhov did not answer the captain. He had been drawn into a hot dispute with the grenadier. As was to be expected, they were talking of the campaign. The Frenchmen, the confusing the Austrians and the Russians, contended that the Russians had not surrendered, but had beaten the French. We have orders to drive you out here, and we will too, said Dolokhov. Better take care you and all your Cossacks are not captured, said the French grenadier. The French soldiers and onlookers laughed. We'll make you dance as we did under Suvorov. Avus fere danser, said Dolokhov. Zest que chante, asked a Frenchman. Ancient history, said another, surmising that the reference was to a former war. The emperor will show your Suvara, just as he showed the others. Bonaparte began Dolo, but the Frenchman interrupted him. Not Bonaparte, he's the emperor. Sacre nom, he shouted angrily. To hell with your emperor! And Dolokhov uttered a coarse soldier's oath in Russian, shouldered his gun, and walked away. Let's go, Ivan Lukitch, he said to the captain. Now that's the way to talk French, said the soldiers in the line. Come on now. Sodorov, your turn. Sodorov winked and, turning to the French soldiers, commenced jabbering meaningless sounds as fast as he could. Kali mola tafa safi mora kaska, he babbled, trying to give an expressive intonation to the words. Ho, 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 ha, ha, ha. Oh, oh, oh. The soldiers burst into a roar of such hearty, jovial laughter that the French could not help joining them, after which, it would seem, there was nothing left for them to do but to unload their guns, explode the ammunition, and all return to their homes as quickly as possible. But the guns remained loaded. The loopholes in the houses and fortifications looked as menacingly as ever, and the unlimbered cannons confronted one another as before. Chapter 16. Having ridden along the whole line from right flank to the left, Prince Andrei made his way to the battery from which, according to the staff officer, the entire field could be seen. Here he dismounted and remained for a while, beside the farthest of 4 unlimbered cannons. An artillery sentry was pacing up and down before the guns was about to stand at attention on seeing an officer, but at a sign from him resumed his measure, monotonous pacing. Behind the guns were their limbers, and still farther back the horses' tethers and the artilleryman's campfires. To the left, not far from the end cannon, was a new wattle hut from which came sounds of officers voicing in lively conversation. It was true that a view of almost the entire disposition of Russian forces and the greater part of the enemy's opened out from this battery. Directly opposite, on the crest of the hill, the village of Schnongraben could be seen, and in 3 places to the left and right it was possible to make out masses of French troops amid the smoke of their campfires, though the greater part were undoubtedly in the village itself and behind the hill. To the left of the village, through the smoke, there was something that looked like a battery, but it was impossible to see it clearly with the naked eye. Our right flank was disposed on a rather steep slope which dominated the French position. Our infantry was stationed there, and on the extreme end, the dragoons. The easiest and most direct ascent and descent to the brook that separated us from Scharnhorst was from Tushin's battery in the center, where Prince Andrei stood surveying the position. On the left, our troops were close to a copse, where smoke could be seen rising from the campfires of the infantrymen who were cutting firewood. The French line was wider than ours, and it was clear that they could easily outflank us on both sides. Behind our position, was a precipitous, deep ravine through which it would be difficult for the artillery and cavalry to retreat. Prince Andrei took out his notebook and, leaning on the cannon, sketched a plan of the disposition of the troops. In 2 places, he made notes of points he intended mentioning to Bagration. First, he would propose concentrating all the artillery at the center, and second, withdrawing the cavalry to the other side of the ravine. Having been continually in attendance at the commander-in-chief, following mass movements and general orders, as well as constantly studying historical accounts of battles, it was natural for Prince Andrei to picture the impending course of military operations in broad outline. He imagined such large-scale possibilities as the following. If the enemy launches an attack on the right flank, he said to himself, the Kiev Grenadiers and the Podolya Chasseurs will have to hold their positions till reserves from the center reach them. In that case, the dragoons can assault their flank and drive them back. In the event that they attack out center, we shall advance the central battery on this height and under its cover, withdraw the left flank, and retreat by the ravine by echelons, he reasoned. All the time he had been standing beside the cannon, he had continually and distinctly heard the officers' voices in the hut, without, as often happens, taking in a word of what they were saying. Suddenly, however, he was struck by a tone of such earnestness that he involuntarily commenced listening to them. "No, my dear fellow," said a pleasant, and as it seemed to Prince Andrei, familiar voice, "I say that if it were possible to know what is beyond death, none of us would be afraid. That's so, my friend." Another younger voice broke in. "Afraid or not, there's no escaping it. But one is always afraid." "Oh, you learn men," said a third virile voice, interrupting them both. "Of course, your artillerymen are very clever. You can take everything along with you, vodka and snacks." And the possessor of the virile voices, evidently an infantry officer, laughed. "Yes, one is always afraid," continued the first speaker, whose voice seemed familiar. "One is afraid of the unknown, that what it is. No matter what one may say about the soul going to heaven, we know there is no heaven. There's only atmosphere up there." Again the virile voice interrupted the artillery officer. "Come, give us a drop of your herb brandy, Tushin," he said. "Ah, that's the captain who stood up in the canteen tent without her boots," thought Prince Andrei, recognizing with pleasure the agreeable, philosophizing voice. "Herb brandy, why not?" said Tushkin, "but all the same to conceive of a future life." He did not finish. Just then there was a whistling sound in the air, nearer and nearer, swifter and louder, louder and swifter, and a cannonball, as if not having finished all it had to say, smacked it into the ground near the hut, throwing up a shower of earth with superhuman force. The ground seemed to groan from that terrible blow. At the same instant, little Tushin, a short pipe in the corner of his mouth, his kind, intelligent face looking rather pale, rushed out of the hut ahead of the others. He was followed by the possessor of virile voice, a dashing infantry officer, who rushed off to his company, buttoning his coat as he ran. Chapter 17. Prince Andrei mounted his horse, but lingered at the battery, looking at the smoke of the cannon from which the cannonball had been shot. His eyes quickly ran over the broad expanse. He saw only that the hitherto inactive masses of the French were now in motion, and that there was, in fact, a battery on the left. The smoke was still hanging over it. 2 Frenchmen on horseback were galloping over the hill. A small, clearly discernible enemy column was moving down the hill, probably to reinforce the front line. The smoke of the first shot had not cleared away when another puff appeared, followed by a report. The battle had begun. Prince Andrei turned his horse and galloped back to Grunt to find Prince Bagration. He heard the cannonade behind him, the reports growing louder and more frequent. Evidently, our guns had begun to reply. Below, where the true emissaries had passed, musket shots could be heard. Lamaris had just galloped up with Bonaparte's intimidating letter, and Marat, mortified and anxious to make amends for his error, instantly moved to his forces to attack the center and outflank both Russian wings, hoping before evening and before the arrival of the Emperor to crush the insignificant detachment facing him. "It has begun! Here it is," thought Prince Andrei, feeling the blood rush to his heart. "But where and how will my Toulon present itself?" he wondered. Passing between companies that had been eating gruel and drinking vodka a quarter of an hour earlier, he saw everywhere the same rapid movements of soldiers forming ranks and examining their weapons, and he recognized on all their faces the same quickening he felt in his own heart. "It has begun! Here it is, awesome and joyous," the face of every officer and soldier seemed to say. Before he reached the fortifications that were being thrown up, he perceived in the evening light of the somber autumn day men on the horseback coming toward him, the foremost rider in a burqa and an astrakhan cap, while riding on a white horse. This was Prince Bagration. Prince Andrei stopped and waited for him. Prince Bagration reined in his horse, and recognizing Prince Andrei, nodded to him. He continued to gaze ahead while Prince Andrei told him what he had seen. Even on Prince Bagration's hard brown face, with its half-closed, somnolent, lustreless eyes, the expression, "It has begun! Here it is!" was discernible. Prince Andrei glanced it with anxious curiosity at that impassive face, wishing he could tell what, if anything, this man was thinking and feeling at that moment. "Is there anything at all behind that impassive face?" he wondered, looking at him. Prince Bagration nodded, signifying his agreement with what Prince Andrei told him, saying, "Good," in a way that seemed to imply that everything that took place and was reported to him was exactly what he had foreseen. Prince Andrei, breathless from his rapid ride, spoke quickly. Prince Bagration, with his Eastern accent, articulated his words with peculiar deliberation, as if suggesting that there was no need for haste. He did, however, put his horse to a trot in the direction of Tushin's battery. Prince Andrei followed with the suite. Riding behind Prince Bagration was an officer of the suite, his personal adjutant, Zherkov, an orderly officer, the staff officer on duty, who was riding a handsome bobtail horse, and a civilian official, an auditor, who had asked permission to ride out to the battle out of curiosity. The auditor, a stout, full-faced man, looked around with a naive, delighted smile, and among all the hussars, Cossacks, and adjutants, presented a strange appearance as he jogged along on a convoy officer's saddle in his camlet cloak. "He wants to have a look at a battle," said Zherkov to Balsky, indicating the auditor, "but he's already got a pain in the pit of his stomach." "Come now, that's enough from you," said the auditor, beaming with a naive yet cunning smile, as though flattered at being made the subject of Zherkov's joke, and was purposely trying to appear more stupid than he actually was. "Trust drôle, mon prince," said the staff officer on duty. He remembered that in French there was some peculiar way of using the title prince that could not get it quite right. Just as they were approaching Tushin's battery, a cannonball struck the ground in front of him. "What was that?" asked the auditor with his naive smile. "A French pancake," said Zherkov. "Is that what they hit you with?" asked the auditor. "How awful!" As he seemed to expand with satisfaction. He had hardly uttered the words when again there was the sudden, terrifying whistling sound, abruptly ending with a thud as something soft was struck. Plop! And Cossack, riding a little to their right and behind the auditor, fell to the ground with his horse. Zherkov and the staff officer leaned forward over their saddles and turned their horses away. The auditor stopped, facing the Cossack, and examined him with the intent curiosity. The Cossack was dead, but the horse was still struggling. Prince Bagration screwed up his eyes, looked back, and seeing the cause of the confusion, turned away indifferently, as if to say, "Why bother about such trifles?" He reined in his horse in the manner of a skilled horseman, and bending forward, disengaged his saber, which had got caught in his burqa. It was an old-fashioned saber, of a kind no longer in use. Prince Andrei remembered the story of Suvorov giving his saber to Bagration in Italy, and the recollection was especially pleasant at the moment. They had reached the battery from which Prince Andrei had examined the battlefield. "Whose company?" Prince Bagration asked the artilleryman standing by the ammunition chest. He asked, "Whose company?" But what he really meant was, "Aren't you scared here?" And the artilleryman understood him. "Captain Tushin's, Your Excellency," sang out the red-headed Freckle artilleryman. "Ah, yes," mumbled Bagration, as if considering something, and he rode past the limbers to the farthest cannon. As he approached it, the cannon was fired, the report defeating him and his suite, and in the smoke that suddenly enveloped the cannon, they could see the gunners who had seized it, and were straining to roll it quickly back to its former position. Number 1, a huge, broad-shouldered soldier with a broad stance, who held the cleaning rod in his hand, sprang up to the wheel. Number 2, with trembling hands, put the charge in the cannon's mouth. A short, round-shouldered man, the officer stumbled across the tail of the gun carriage and ran forward, not noticing the general. He peered out, shading his eyes with his small hand. "Raise it another 2 points, and it will be just right," he shouted in a shrill voice, to which he tried to impart a note of swagger ill-suited his figure. "Number 2, he piped. "Smash him, Medvedev." Bagration called him, and Tushin went up to the general, raising 3 fingers to the visor of his cap in a timid, awkward gesture that was more like a priest giving a blessing than a soldier saluting. Although Tushin's guns were meant to bombard the valley, he was firing incendiary balls at the village of Schnagrabin, in front of which large masses of French could be seen moving. No one had given Tushin orders where and at what to fire, but after consulting his sergeant major, Zach Cheknok, for whom he had great respect, he had decided that it would be a good thing to set fire to the village. "Good!" said Bagration in reply to the officer's report, and he began to survey the whole battlefield, opening out before him as if considering something. The French had advanced nearest on the right side. Below the height on which the Kiev regiment was stationed, the gripping crackle and peal of gunfire could be heard from the hollow through which the brook flowed, and much farther to the right, beyond the dragoons, the officer of the suite pointed out to Bagration a French column that was outflanking us. On the left, the horizon was bounded by the adjacent forests. Prince Bagration ordered 2 battalions from the center to be sent to reinforce the right flank. The officer of the suite ventured to observe to the prince that if these battalions were to leave, the cannon would not be covered. Prince Bagration turned to the officer and silently stared at him with dull eyes. It seemed to Prince Andrei that the officer's observation was correct, and that there were really nothing to say to it. But at the moment, an adjutant from the regimental commander, who was down in the hollow, galloped up with the news that huge masses of the French were descending upon them, that the regiment had broken ranks and was retreating in disorder toward the Kiev Grenadiers. Prince Bagration bowed his head in sign of assent and approval. He rode off to the right at a walking pace and sent an adjutant to the dragoons with orders to attack the French. But the adjutant returned half an hour later and reported that the commander of the dragoons had already retreated beyond the ravine. A heavy fire had been opened on him, and he was needlessly losing men, and therefore he had hastened to get them into the forest. "Good," said Bagration. As he rode away from the battery, firing was heard in the wood on the left also, and it was too far to the left flanks for him to go himself. Prince Bagration sent Zherkov to tell the general in command, the same general whose regiment had been reviewed by Kutuzov at Brno, that he was to retreat as quickly as possible beyond the ravine, as the right flank would probably be unable to hold back the enemy for long. But as for Tushin and the battalion that had been covering him, all was forgotten. Prince Andrei listened carefully to Prince Bagration's exchanges with the commanding officers, and to the orders he gave them, observing to his surprise that orders were not actually given, but that Prince Bagration tried to make it appear that everything, whether done by necessity, chance, or by the will of the unit commanders, was done, if not by his command, at least in accord with his intentions. Prince Andrei noticed that though what happened was due to chance and was independent of the commander's will, thanks to the attack Prince Bagration displayed, his presence was of the greatest value. Commanding officers who rode up to him with distraught expressions became calm. Soldiers and officers greeted him cheerfully, recovered their spirits in his presence, and appeared anxious to display their courage before him. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them below. Subscribe if you like, or and keep watching, or you don't do anything. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.